Hi, I'm Mari Ryan. I'm the CEO and founder of Advancing Wellness. Welcome to this Workplace Wellbeing Essential Series, where we explore topics that impact employee well-being. My guest today is Rosie Ward. Rosie is an accomplished speaker, author, coach, and consultant. Her expertise lies in organizational effectiveness, leadership development, and worksite health promotion. She uses her extensive knowledge to help organizations develop and implement strategies to create workplaces where the organization and its people can thrive. Her new book, Rehumanizing the Workplace, is due out on March 24th. Rosie, welcome. I'm so excited to be here with you today.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here with you.
The work that both of us have done over the last decade or so has really been focused on creating workplaces where people can thrive, where the organization really cares for people and really focuses on what it takes to make a thriving workplace, not just for the business, but for the people as well. I've noticed in your recent work that you're focusing on rehumanizing the workplace. So that says to me, it must mean that at some point the workplace has gone astray, has become dehumanized. So what are the issues and how did we get to where we are today?
There is a lot in that. So let me see if I can unpack it one piece at a time. So we kind of go back to the overarching umbrella of really the world that we are living and working in is fundamentally different than it was, as you know, even 5 or 10 years ago.
Sure.
And I'm a big believer that when things get messy and when things get complex and chaotic, being able to find language to put to the things that we're experiencing helps us process it, helps us understand it, helps us move forward. And so I was super excited a few years ago when I learned of an acronym that has been used for well over a couple decades, VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And it stems from the Army War College, but it's been so fascinating because I cannot pick up a leadership book or a business book or a Harvard Business Review article that literally doesn't talk about VUCA or talks about a disruptive world. And so VUCA really describes what we're living and working in. Disruption is the new normal. And as we know, that disruption can bring awesome things, technological advances and growth and all kinds of things that help us progress as a society and help us be better and more effective. But the more that we automate things and the more that things become disruptive, there's unintended consequences where the dehumanization comes into play. And really where the unintended consequences are is if you just kind of look at our biology as human beings, we are hardwired to seek out comfort, familiarity, feeling good about ourselves, right? Looking good. It's in our DNA. And so the inherent characteristics of a VUCA world throw that out the window. Right. And they trigger us. They trigger all these physiological, the amygdala hijacking the brain, fight or flight response of, something's wrong, danger. And what we find happening is the more that there's this progress and this disruption happening, the more that our brains are getting signaled that something's not right, that we are out of our comfort zone. And so we clamp down. And what you see is people clinging even tighter to what is familiar to them. And many times in the case of whether it's organizational and employee well-being, whether it's employee engagement, whether it's safety, we are clinging to outdated strategies and approaches because it's comfortable and because it's familiar. And we almost double down on it because it's too scary to think of, oh my gosh, I may have to completely redo what my expertise is in, or I suddenly am completely out of my realm, right? So you've got that part as far as clinging to strategies. Then you have the inherent other part of that, which is when we are in this self-protective mode, we show up in all kinds of unproductive ways. We tell ourselves stories that are self-limiting and keep us really safe, but keep us small. Brene Brown likes to call it armor, but we basically are showing up in a way that, okay, I want to feel safe, so I don't want you to see my inadequacies, see that I'm imperfect. I'm going to try to hide my flaws. I'm wearing masks and armor. So now you take a whole bunch of people who are showing up triggered, who are showing up in self-protective mode, and you put them in a team, in a family, in a community group, in a workplace, and it's just like a perfect storm of nonsense, right? And so this is really, I think, at the fundamental core of what is contributing. We can go into all the different paths of why, but it's really it's the just inherent evolution of our society being a VUCA world. And then it's the human condition trying to reconcile how do you thrive and fit in this disruptive reality that triggers all kinds of really unproductiveness if we don't pay attention to it.
Right. Well, I'm getting stressed just listening to your description of all that. So it's like, okay, I get it. This is really stressful.
Yeah.
Among other things, it's really stressful for people, which makes
Yeah.
me wonder, how has all this dehumanizing really impacted the well-being of the people in these kinds of organizations where they're dealing with all of this kind of transition and change?
Yeah, I think that it has impacted us, unfortunately, in not really great ways. I mean, we have so many different studies, whether it's from the American Psychological Association or American Institute of Stress, or even you look globally, and God bless Jeffrey Pfeffer and his research, which I think has been really pioneering in this space, looking at what these dehumanized or toxic workplaces do to us. And we see stress eroding our health. Depending on the stats you look, it's anywhere around 80% of all doctor visits are stress related, right? We know that chronic stress in work is a main source of it. So the list goes on and on. But what it's fundamentally doing then is you are seeing that workplaces, according to Jeffrey Pfeffer's research, are the fifth leading cause of death in the United States. And they're accounting for 8% of our healthcare spend. And, it makes sense, because if you look at it, if you think about, if you're feeling devalued at work, if you're unable to reconcile this disruptive environment, if you're feeling like you don't know how you fit in or where you thrive, or you feel like you don't belong, there's a ton of research on loneliness as well. If all of that is happening, as human beings, we want to seek out something to ease that discomfort, to ease that pain, to ease that stress. And so, of course, you see people starting to revert to all kinds of behaviors, whether it's isolation, whether it's turning to numbing substances. It could be opioids, it could be overeating, it could be, smoking, it could be drinking, whatnot. It could be engaging in other kinds of behaviors that are risky. It's trying to help not feel that. And so it's this perfect storm. And I think when our mental and emotional well-being is struggling, it's kind of like all bets are off. It's really hard to function. And
Right.
there's been such an increased focus on emotional well-being in the workplace and mental well-being. And I'm so glad that the discussion, like nationally and globally, is broadening, because it needs to. And I think we've got to be so careful that we don't get into how do we help individuals be resilient when we're not addressing the root cause of many of these issues, which is organizations are causing it. So there's got to be a interconnected, holistic way of addressing this, because what I hate to see, and I can see it happening because it's happened with other aspects of wellness, of let's just start to do a lot of programming around resiliency and programming around mental health and referring people to resources. And it's just trying to mop up the water downstream, and we're not turning off the faucet.
Well, I see this all the time with my clients, or I get a call from somebody and say, do you do stress programs? And it's like, well, let's talk about what's causing the stress. And until we get to the root cause and eliminate the root cause, and all the programs in the world aren't going to be effective.
Yeah, I call it playing a bad game of whack-a-mole, right? It's just like it doesn't get you very far, and it's really frustrating.
Yes, that's a good description. Yes.
Yeah.
So what is it that employers can do then to rehumanize the workplace so that people feel cared for and that they're able to deal with some of these ongoing issues?
There's a lot that employers can do, and it doesn't have to be overwhelming, but you have to kind of have a starting point. And so I think that first and foremost, it's kind of taking a step back and just looking at some key, I'm going to call them kind of business 101 principles, that if you want to improve the well-being of employees, you got to kind of start with what we call the organizational well-being side. And so in our new book, we outline what we call 5 rehumanizing principles, which are not just applicable to workplaces. They're really applicable to any group, any family, community group, team, etc. And it's really based on a conglomeration of a whole bunch of people who know what they're talking about and a whole bunch of research. And so the first is what we call build a lighthouse. So if you think about a lighthouse, what does it do? It cuts through the fog, and it helps people find their way. So when the VUCA seas or the VUCA storms of life are, tossing us about and we don't know which way to turn, we've got something to guide our way forward. And so that's kind of the metaphor, the analogy we use, is that organizations need to have a clear sense of purpose. So this is where Simon Sinek and Patrick Lencioni, find your why work comes in. And as you know, it's beyond a mission and vision. It says there's truly clarity of purpose that people feel attached to, and they really feel like they belong, and that purpose means something to them. And then the next part of that, though, is it's not just having that purpose, it's really operationalizing your core values and translating them into core behaviors, which is a step that I think Brene Brown's latest research found only 10% of organizations have actually operationalized their values. So what are the key behaviors that are essential for your purpose to be realized? And what are like the slippery or out of scope behaviors that we want to watch out for, and that we train people them, we develop people around them, we have corrective conversations if we need to, we offload people, I mean, they really are truly, they're not just words on a wall or a website. And then from the individual level, it's kind of a similar thing. If I'm an individual in an organization and I don't know my own purpose, Vic Strecker and other people's research of purpose on individual well-being, but it's also, do I see how my purpose aligns with where the organization is going? And there's some sort of synergy. And then do I know what's expected of me? Right. And do I know what I need in my life, kind of my own personal core values to show up as my best and live my purpose? So it's really twofold. It's, does the organization know, and is it clear? And do the individuals, do we all know in our lives? And then can we find that synergy and alignment and find a home that nurtures that? And so I think what organizations can do is, if they haven't done the work to find their why, yes, you can hire consulting firms. We do that all the time, but you know what? Go get the Find Your Why book and find an internal champion. I know Michelle Spear came alive and did that work in her organization. So there's ways that you can find an internal champion to start to do this work. It's not rocket science. It's just whether you have the bandwidth or capacity. So that's really the first thing, is because I think that by itself goes a long way in kind of calming people in, it's calm in the midst of the storm. Right. And so that's the first rehumanizing principle that we talk about, that anybody can really start to dip their toe in that water and move that forward wherever you are, whether you have it and you just need to nurture it, or you're just starting out. And then the second principle really piggybacks off of Amy Edmondson's work on psychological safety. And that's, we have to create fearless environments. So I think it's a misnomer that thriving in human workplaces are all rainbows and unicorns. That's just not realistic, right? No. I mean, it'd be nice, right? But we're dealing with, I like sparkles, don't get me wrong, but we're dealing with human beings. And so if you look at like these thriving human workplaces, yes, they have struggle. Yes, they're real. Yes, they have difficult conversations. Yes, they embrace radical candor, but they create a safe environment for people to do that. Right. And so if we don't make it safe for people to show up fully human, to take off their masks and armor, to admit that they're struggling with what the VUCA world's throwing at them, we're in a whole host of trouble. And the nice thing about all the research on psychological safety, and it piggybacks on all the research on workplace culture, as you know, Mari, is it resides at the local team level. So I think we think about culture as this huge organizational thing, but it's built team by team. So you can start one team at a time. And this is actually, this is a huge eye opener for me. And one of the things we talk about in our new book is that, even if you think about, like, conscious capitalism talks about CEO support, and Walcoa talks about CEO support. And it's not that that's not helpful, but what's been hugely eye opening for me the last few years is it's not a deal breaker. And that you can actually transform culture at the local level. Yeah, grassroots. Kind of like grassroots organizing. Yeah. And it actually sometimes sticks better because there's natural momentum versus something being like pushed out or a top-down approach. And so if you want to look at where do organizations start, I always say, do this. Pick a team that's doing pretty good, like your kind of champion team, and see if you can kind of enhance them or look at what are they doing. And pick a team that's struggling and just kind of pilot something and look at how do you help create more psychologically safe work teams. And there's a lot that kind of goes into that. But when you do that, you can start to kind of then have a ripple effect, and it doesn't seem so overwhelming. So we've got to have that psychologically safe space where people can do the work they need to do to transform as human beings to thrive in this messy world. Yeah.
I see this all the time with clients that I'm working with, where they have microcultures. So whether it's, different locations, led by a strong, general manager or manager, you really see the difference as you go and see those microcultures within an organization.
Hugely see that difference. Yeah. And then that gets us into the third rehumanizing principle, which is we call it wait in the messy middle. And I think that, in our fast-paced disruptive world, we want a magic wand, we want a magic bullet, we want shortcuts, and enter, trying to incentivize behavior change and all of that stuff that we know doesn't work. And I think that what we need to fundamentally realize is that there's a lot of great work out there, for example, from Bob Keegan and others who pioneered adult development theories and really looking at the different cognitive stages we're at. And that a lot of what we've been focused on is behavior, when what we need to really focus on is that underlying cognitive development level and mindset, and that we need to help people upgrade or upshift to be able to navigate the VUCA world so we can stop some of this swirl. So it's really a reconciling of like human developmental stage and what the world is demanding of us. And there's a gap. And so instead of trying to focus on behavior change, it's how do we help people cross that gap, cross that threshold, and really level up so that this swirl isn't so chaotic, right? And so wade in the messy, and so wade in the messy middle is really recognizing that there are no shortcuts and there is not a fast forward button, and that the only way to get better at something is to go through it. And that means it's going to be uncomfortable at times. It means it's going to be messy. It's not going to be perfect. It's going to feel ugh. But when we do the work and go through it, that's the technical term
I know,
right?
Yeah.
but when we do the work and go through it, it's profoundly impactful, and that's what's sustainable. And so when we talk about wade in the messy middle, it's really looking at, how are you supporting people to be more self-aware, first and foremost, to recognize their inner narratives that serve them well, and also recognize when their inner narrative is keeping them small, keeping them from having the impact they want to have, and really doing that difficult work to upgrade that inner narrative, upgrade the Bob Anderson and Bill Adams from Mastering Leadership call it our inner operating system. And they talk about upgrading it, right? Like if we were trying to run a elaborate graphics software program or podcast program on a computer still running DOS operating system, not going to work so well, right? Or if you try to install an app on a flip phone, it wouldn't work. And so often we are trying to implement programs, whether it's a leadership development program or resiliency or mental well-being or physical well-being or you name it, on an operating system that can't support it because that operating system is in a downshifted self-protective mode. And so they've done some really great work to look at how do we really upgrade that inner operating system. And what they say is that inner game of ourselves, that inner game of leadership runs the outer game. And we spend all our time in the outer game, and we have to tend to the inner game. They both matter, but we have to tend to the inner game and then hone the outer game, right? So from an organization standpoint, I think it's looking at, your people development strategy, and do only people that are considered quote unquote high potentials or next geners or the C-suite or whoever get access to development, or does really everybody have access to development? And is your development more of that outer game skill based, or is your development focused on that inner game self-awareness? And how can you embed some of that and really look thoughtfully and intentionally at your people development strategy, not just for what you have today, but what's going to get you to where you want to be 5 years from now? So that's all in that wade in the messy middle principle that people can start doing, that I think will fundamentally help people thrive really and be future ready. And then the fourth principle is show up as a leader. And we really look at leadership. There's a lot of great definitions of leadership out there that we used to use and borrow from for many years. And then we finally just kind of put it together and came up with our own definition that really synthesizes the people who've inspired us. And so we say that first and foremost, leadership is maximizing our positive impact on the world by becoming our best, fully authentic selves, and then inspiring those around us to break past barriers and step into their greatness. So there's a lot in that. But if you think about that, it's a combination of self and others. And it's really about what do we need to tend to be the best version of ourselves, be authentically human, be armor free, learn and grow, stretch ourselves, etc. And then how do we call others around us to do the same? And so we fundamentally believe that leadership is not a title or a role, it's a behavior. And I think everybody knows somebody or people who have the title, the role, the power, the authority, the responsibility, and they are no way a leader, right? And we know people who don't have that, and they are absolutely a leader. And so I love kind of the way Bob Chapman and Barry Wehmiller look at this, that leaders are everywhere, find them. And I say leaders are everywhere, develop them and support them. And that everybody has an opportunity, not just to show up as a leader at work, but in your life. Right? Are you making a positive impact in your communities, on your family, on your friends? And so showing up as a leader is really helping people recognize that, and then help them kind of move past that self-limiting dialogue, which they can't have done, by the way, if they haven't waded in the messy middle, and they can't do if they don't have a fearless environment, right? So they kind of build on each other. But I think about conversations I've had with people, whether they're in the wellness industry or HR, and I hear all the time, yeah, but Rosie, you have a PhD in organization and management. I'm just a wellness person, or I'm just the HR person, or I don't have access to the C-suite. I'm just a fill in the blank. And I always say, first, we need to remove the just from our language. You're not just anybody, right? You're a person who's amazing. And the second is really looking at, it's all about just look at how can I make a positive impact? How can I make a ripple? And if I can influence one person or one team or a group of people and start really growing from there, that's being a leader. And I think we undercut ourselves, we discount ourselves, and that doesn't serve anybody really well.
What I really love about your definition is that it really applies to everyone in the organization, not just the senior people in the organization.
Yep. Yeah. And I would even suggest that when you look at the research of like the flattening of the organizations and more mobile network of teams and how organizations are kind of reorganizing from that traditional hierarchical org structure to this kind of, we got to be fluid, and we have a project and we organize around that and then we reorganize. When you look at kind of what's happening even just in that space, we need everybody to show up as a leader, right? You need everybody to be able to take initiative, to be able to be forward thinking, to be able to know how to have a positive impact, be able to have those interpersonal skills. It's critical that we can't just reserve it for the C-suite.
Exactly. That's
yeah.
great.
And then that really gets us into the fifth rehumanizing principle, which we say, find your tribe. And that's not about go find people who are like you because it helps you feel safe and secure. It's really about building relationships. And we've always said that building a thriving culture, building a thriving community, building a thriving team is not a solo journey. No one person, you don't do it in a bubble. We are neurobiologically hardwired for connection. And so what are we doing to foster authentic connections with people, grow the conversation, look at who else you want to partner with, and really looking at too, how do you seek out people who are intentionally seek out people who are different than you? I mean, think about diversity and equity and inclusion and really trying to understand and learn, because we all have our own biases. And so find your tribe is really about it's about building community, and it's about growing community, right, and recognizing that the stronger our communities get, then the more impact that we can have. So those are the 5 principles that we've really learned anyone can kind of use, and it doesn't matter if it's work or home. And then they're woven throughout the book as we tell stories and look at other things, but really how are people doing that? And it's it's simple, but it's complex at the same time.
I get it. It is both. And I love the last point of, connection and community are 2 core elements of the framework that many of us use for defining well-being. So those are essential pieces. That's fabulous. Rosie, if our audience wants to learn more about you, the work you're doing, and to find out more about your book, where can they find you?
Yeah, the first place I would say is our website, salveopartners.com. We have the book on there. You can pre-read the introduction and order it from there. We've got all kinds of free white papers and ebooks and recorded webinars and just resources for people that might be helpful. And then my just relaunched drrosieward.com website also has more personal inspiration, kind of that show up as a leader, where if people are looking to be inspired and step out of their self-limiting barriers, the Dr. Rosie Ward site is useful for that. And Salveo Partners will be more applicable for work sites.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being here today to share the information about your new book, which I'm very excited to read. And as always, for all the contributions that you're making to create thriving workplaces and communities.
Well, thank you for having me. And thanks for all the work you do too, Mari.
Thanks.